You want a shout out for me and have more vids frequently? Then support me on Patreon, where the cost is only $3. It's rare to see a show with a different main cast in a new season. The biggest reason for that is because of the major risks that is involved in this scenario. The pros of keeping the main cast is that it gives a sense of familiarity to the audience, and many would love to see these characters develop in various ways. Taking that familiarity away in a cast can put a show at risk of losing the interest of audience members if the new set of faces don't work out in their eyes. But how familiar does a character need to be? Well, we definitely see that experimented here in Infinity Train. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Blade, and this is a batch special on Infinity Train Book 2. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, I really want to talk about the new main protagonist and why they chose this character to be the main focal point. What challenges does this character have to overcome in order to grow? What is the theme? What do they want the audience to experience with this character? For this season, IT decided to make her the main focus. Now, with this character, we have seen her in the previous season, and we originally know her as MT, a name that she would stick with throughout the season until the end, since she isn't fond of MT either. To keep things simple, the second book focuses on MT wanting to stand out and make her own life choices. Even though she is free from Tulip, she hasn't been able to have that opportunity to live her life as a regular person. With always being on the run from the Reflection Police, she has to have heightened awareness to stay alive. This caused her to not trust anyone and be very hostile towards anyone who speaks with her. This is a sort of premise that can be interesting for a fan. After all, MT can be considered familiar because of that link she has with Tulip. Plus, it would be interesting to see how she lives her life on the train after Tulip gave her that freedom. However, with how Book 2 played out, MT is not a good main protagonist in my opinion. She has a lot of flaws that can be redeemable, but doesn't do nearly enough to grow. Let's start this off with how she starts off in Book 2 in her introduction in the black market car. I will say I did like the montage of getting into her new look. It made her look pretty badass, and the first part of this episode gave a lot of action-packed moments in the first episode. The second half, she turns into that spoiled brat with the supporting main cast showing up in this episode. When she gets introduced to the deer, also known as Alan Dracula, she becomes really attached to the deer because guess what? He helped her, doesn't speak, and keeps her company when she has food. It was easier for her because with animals, it doesn't take too much for one to find comfort in someone else with small acts of kindness and curiosity. However, the deer's interest in others also brought in our second character who MT was not fond of at first. Meet Jesse, the passenger for this season. From just meeting him, we know that Jesse is an easygoing guy, someone who tries to look at the brighter side of every situation and cherish the time he spends with others. MT witnessed him hanging out with the deer and dressing him up. She gets really ticked for that, going on about its freedom and taking away its right to live his life. But then goes on to say,
"But if he was anyone's deer, he'd be my deer, because I hung out with him longer, like 2 days."
You see this? This is a face of a hypocrite. The audacity that she preaches all this to a guy who just wants to take selfies is so incredibly dumb. Plus, she loses all that credibility of being justified by claiming she owns the deer. While I understand that this is the first episode and we need to recognize some of the character's flaws, we also do need reasons to like the character in order to root for them. And I'm sorry, being on the run from the law, no matter how unfair it is, shouldn't be the only reason. Especially if you have seen what she did in the Chrome Car episode in Book 1 and her own feelings towards Tulip. MT still has that animosity towards Tulip with how easily triggered she gets when someone even mentions her name. I don't know about you, but that is a huge problem for me. Obviously she has a desire to live her own life, and she had her best shot with the theme of the Chrome Car intact. She was deliberately willing to trap Tulip in the reflective universe, and when she realizes it's no use, Tulip finds a way to cheat the system for MT to finally have her freedom. Even with that act of kindness, she still references Tulip in a negative way. Think of it this way, if you see a person and they tricked you to gain an advantage, when they fail, you are still willing to help them out. When you go your separate ways, they still want to talk crap about you behind your back every time you're mentioned. A character like that doesn't really get a lot of likability points, and it's going to take a lot for them to grow on you. So the first thing that can be used as a rebuttal is that it's not Tulip necessarily, but the system that MT was forced to comply with in having to do the exact movements of the Prime. Here's the problem with that. Barely anyone mentions Tulip. The only time an MT is compared to Tulip is with 1-1 and the cat. Even then, it was just because they remember her. 1-1 knew her because she had history with MT in the Chrome car, while the cat mistakes her for Tulip because they look similar. But that's enough to make her get extremely snappy at others. Even when she discreetly talks about Tulip to Jessie, very poorly mind you, Jessie doesn't agree with her mindset towards her Prime. Even then, as a viewer since the first episode of the series, you know that she never accepts her mistreatment of Tulip. While Tulip was empathetic towards MT, it isn't an excuse for MT to not admit to herself that during that situation, she was in the wrong in some way and no one can call her on that except for the Flex, and obviously they're not the best option since they're trying to kill her. But that isn't the worst of it. Oh, no. Before I tell my next point, this is getting into deep spoiler territory. So if you want to skip that, here's a timestamp and it'll also be in the description. Alright, so as book 2 went on, MT became more fond of Jessie and started to even grow feelings for him. Jessie liked her a lot and promised that he was going to leave the train with her by his side. Here's the problem with that. She's a Dennison. So eventually when his door arrived, he unintentionally left without her. This happened in episode 7, the mall car, just over the halfway mark since we know there are 10 episodes in total. So for the next 3, we would have been without Jessie. At least that's what I thought, but we'll get to that. MT, unsurprisingly, was not willing to give up in getting off that train, so she was on her way in getting her number herself. But how is she gonna do that? Well, I don't know. How about she hijacks a pod and try to take one of the passengers' numbers? And if that don't work, we'll wreck everything until we get what we want. Never have I witnessed such selfish actions from a protagonist in recent memory. I get it. She wants to be with Jessie and she wants to truly be free to do so. However, these goals and aspirations cause her to think less of other people that have nothing to do with the situation. If she were to have a number, it would have gone through the roof. She never takes a moment to think about the consequences of her actions. And the worst part is that she never gets punished for it, especially with the Deus Ex Machina of Jessie coming back on the train, making everything go haywire. So out of a desperate attempt at reflecting the number of Jessie, she was granted to leave. Just watching that sequence happen made me want to bang my head against the wall because she didn't earn her right to leave. She once again took advantage of someone else in order to get what she wants. When watching this journey, it is clear that the main thing to take from it is to not let anyone tell you how to live your life. As good and important that lesson is, I just don't think MT was the best character to use as the main protagonist for it, because of the desperation and carelessness she has shown throughout. On acknowledging the faults she has, the consequences based on her actions, and being inconsiderate of others around her makes rooting for her darn near impossible for me. Her lack of growth is what made this book a bit of a downgrade compared to book 1 and just an average season overall. So what could they have done for the main character role to increase the status of book 2 for me? Well, there are 2 things that I think would help improve it from being an average season to a fantastic one. The first option is changing the main lesson in the season overall. Instead of it being the idea of not letting everyone tell you how to live your life, the lesson could be the idea of either accepting your faults or letting go and moving on. There were so many moments where she may have accepted her own faults, to look at herself and reflect if her mindset is skewed in any sort of way. I felt that if she were to be completely honest of why she was wanted and what she attempted to do to her prime to get that freedom, that would increase her character growth tenfold. Even then, that moment in the mall car honestly would have been the best thing to happen to MT because it forces a dilemma of having to accept the circumstances and make the best of the situation. It's funny because both Jessie and MT are polar opposites of each other. MT needing to learn how to accept her situation and be considerate to others, while Jesse needed to learn to stand up for himself and not put others' enjoyment above his. Which leads me to option 2. Make Jesse the main protagonist instead of MT. I feel like this would have been the best scenario, even though we know that the number system works based on how the passenger grows while they're on the train. That familiarity may be enough for the show to be strong. I personally did like the idea of having a new main cast for each season for this particular show because of the structure that was set up in book 1. Each passenger has a unique flaw and they must grow as a person in order to be let off the train. Plus, swapping the roles of Jesse and MT wouldn't affect much of the original plot until episode 7. I think having Jesse be the focal point would also give MT a better opportunity to be used differently here and also grow. What if she starts to accept that maybe being a Dennison isn't so bad if she's able to help people like Jesse get back to their homes? It may take away some big moments that really change the ideas of what the limits are for Cartoon Network, but the main focus isn't to push the boundaries just because. The main focus is to tell a compelling story that can be satisfactory. Unfortunately, that's not the case for book 2, at least for me. I'm very curious to what you guys think of MT as a character in book 2. Do you agree with some of the points that I have made? Or do you think I'm completely in the wrong here? Either way, I still did enjoy book 2 in some aspects, and it makes me curious as to what could happen in the next season for this series if it's greenlit. Thanks for taking the time to see this batch special. If you would like to see more, click the videos to the left. Until then, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.